What started off on the 24th of June, 1916, to be a bombardment of the enemy's lines ended in disaster. A few days later, on the 1st of July, 1916, the British soldiers passed over their lines to attack. It started at 7:20 with 17 mines exploding on the enemy's front. And by the end of the day, that day alone, the British lost 58,000 casualties on one day. It was more than the British had lost in the Crimean War, the Boer War, and the Korean War combined on one day. Many battalions lost huge amounts of their soldiers. In fact, there was a regiment from Newfoundland, 801 men. Out of that day, 68 of them only remained unharmed. 500 lay dead on the battlefield that day. They wiped out a large portion from those people in Newfoundland. You can imagine the sorrow that came to the hearts of the wives, of the mothers, and the sisters of those men. For months this offensive went on, and it continued. By the time that late autumn rolled around in 1916, 1.5 million casualties had amounted on the battlefield in front of the Somme River in France. Could this have been avoided, we may ask? On a natural level, it could have been avoided if General Haig had not decided to go and push this attack and was insistent that he go through one certain area. Or could it have been avoided spiritually? Could there have been some reason spiritually? The 19th September in 1846, Our Lady appeared to two children in La Salette, France. She said, quote, "I gave you 6 days to work. I kept the 7th for myself, and no one wishes to grant it to me. This is what weighs down the arm of my son so much." She goes on to say, quote, "If, when you say to the people that what I have said to you so far, and what I will still ask you to say, if after that they do not convert, if they do not do penance, if they do not cease working on Sunday, if they continue to blaspheme the holy name of God, in a word, if the face of the earth does not change, God will avenge against the people, ungrateful and slave of the demons." Our Lady of La Salette. We can see how important the day of the Lord was for them. We can also see that men did not mend their ways. They did not change. Instead, they continued working on Sunday. They continued blaspheming Him. And World War I was a punishment. Remember that Our Lady of Fatima said that war is a punishment for men's sin. And she came and she warned us the first time at La Salette. Later on she came and warned us at Fatima, and men did not change. It's because the people of the nations sinned that all these men suffered. All of these women and mothers and wives suffered at the loss of their husbands, their brothers, and their children. We can see how sin affects all of us. Our Lord gave us Sunday as the day of the Lord, His day, the day of the Lord. The third commandment, if we look at that third commandment, it is partially ceremonial and partially it's prescriptive, a precept of morals. So two things are involved, the moral commandment and the particulars of how it's done, which is the ceremonial part of it. St. Thomas explains, quote, "It is a moral precept in the point of commanding man to set aside certain time to be given to divine things. For there is in man a natural inclination to set aside certain time for necessary things, such as refreshment of the body, sleep, and so forth. Hence, according to the dictation of reason, man sets aside certain times for spiritual refreshment, by which man's mind is refreshed in God. And thus to have a certain time set aside for occupying oneself with divine things is a matter of a moral precept. End quote, St. Thomas. We can see how important it is then that God has given us. And this, because it is given by our Lord, is indispensable. It's part of the natural law. All men are bound to it. Now the Church comes along and determines how it is done. In the past, we noted that it was done on the Sabbath day. We note, though, because it was part ceremonial, that this is tied in also as well. We remember something very important regarding the ceremonial precepts, that those actions convey a truth which they represent. There's some truth that they are manifesting, and so it speaks something which is true in the very actions that we do. When we consider in the Old Testament, the Old Law, we see how it was done on Saturday. This to look forward, to represent the day that our Lord rested in the tomb. It prefigured that. Once that was fulfilled, then there was no need anymore to have it on Saturday. And in fact, it was done on the Lord's Day, that the day which our Lord rose from the dead. And this to point to a fact which we see today. Because our Lord is risen from the dead, we are now looking towards that 8th day, the day in which we ourselves will die. We ourselves, God willing, will make it to heaven. That day of rest. And so it represents something which is true in itself. So we can ask then, what is permitted on this, the Lord's Day? What is permitted by law? Well, servile work is not permitted. Servile being that work which is done by servants. Painting your house, fishing with nets, working in the fields. Those things we see so many people doing on this day. Cutting their lawn. How many times do you drive down the road and you see them? It's almost as if they save up all their work for Sunday so that they can work on Sunday. And this in God's face. Well, what is permitted then? We can see that travel is permitted. Painting pictures, cooking, going to a symphony or play, going to a ball game. Things which bring leisure, things which bring rest to the mind. And the reason is very simple. It's to help us to make that day holy, to give us rest so our minds can rest in God. Now you might argue, well, I like plowing my field. Maybe you say, well, I ride a motor that cuts the lawn, and I enjoy doing that, and I think about God from time to time with that. You can ask, well, is that really the case? Are you really making this the Lord's Day? The thing here is it's servile work. It's work that servants do. That's what's not permitted. So it's not important whether you like plowing the field or you like cutting the grass. It's time set apart for God. We think oftentimes the day of rest. It's true. It is the day of rest. But it is also the Lord's Day. The rest is for a reason, so our minds may be lifted up to God. Because our minds are so often down on the things of the earth for 6 days. We can spend one day lifting it up to God. Remember the old law. It was not permitted even to cook or travel certain distances. So we can ask why in the New Testament is the observance of the Holy Day seemingly more lenient in areas that the old law wasn't. Well, St. Thomas explains this as well, and he says, quote, "In the new law, the observance of the Lord's Day took the place of the observance of the Sabbath, not by virtue of the precept, but by the institution of the Church and the custom of Christian people. For this observance is not figurative, as was the observance of the Sabbath of the old law. Hence the prohibition to work on the Lord's Day is not so strict as on the Sabbath. And certain works are permitted on the Lord's Day, which were forbidden on the Sabbath, such as cooking of food and so forth. And again, the new law dispensation is more easily granted than in the old in matters of certain forbidden works on account of their necessity, because of the figure pertains to the protestation of truth, which is lawful to omit even in small things, while works considered in themselves are changeable in point and place and time." St. Thomas. Sometimes we have to do certain works which are required, or which charity calls us to do. Remember today's gospel. Our Lord uses the example of the ox that has fallen into the ditch. Sometimes acts of charity call us to that. That's why he cures the man with dropsy. There's other acts which require us as well. For example, say it's harvest time, and there's arriving a hailstorm. Well, the person can bring in the harvest at the time for fear of those things being destroyed. Also, we note the doctors and policemen. They also have to work on that day. There's works of necessity as well. Then we can ask them, as far as work goes, some people have told me something different. Some people say that one thing is serious, one thing is not. Well, most of the moralists say that 2 hours of work constitutes mortal sin. That's not to say that, well, Father, I'm just going to do 1.5 hours of work then today and try to get away with this. We can ask ourselves then, can I legitimately, for any purpose, come up and just beat my wife till she's black and blue? I'm not killing her. I'm just injuring her. Well, that's the same thing. If we're doing an intentional venial sin, well, I'll do 1.5 hours. Remember, it's our Lord's Day. We honor Him. We love Him. What about shopping? What is forbidden in regards to shopping? The reason that shopping is forbidden, if we look at it, is because it's keeping other people in employment. We can see that some places have to stay open. For example, pharmacies, in order to give out medicines, or restaurants, to give people ease. Somebody's going to be cooking, whether it be at home or in the restaurant. So it is permitted to go to restaurants to eat, because somebody has to do the cooking. But department stores, stores which sell clothes, music stores, can they not wait till Monday? Can you not do this for our Lord on His day? You might say, but the sale for shoes, it's going away. It's not going to be here on Sunday. Well, will that fly on Judgment Day when we're standing before our Lord? Father John Hardon made a commentary on the Sunday and the workday, and he pointed out of keeping the holy day, keeping the Sunday, the day of the Lord. Our Lord intends to give certain graces to us. But remember that He can determine the means in which it's going to be given, how it's going to come to us. And our Lord intends to give us the grace for our entire week to get through it. And many people who fail to keep the day of the Lord, end up by not getting the graces necessary for that week. They fall into sin. They don't get that grace. They're overcome by their enemy. They become casualties in the spiritual life. Casualties time and time again. We can ask, could those people in the song have avoided those casualties? It's true, they could have. Had they honored our Lord, not blasphemed Him, kept holy the Sunday, could we avoid being casualties as well in the spiritual life? We can. If we honor our Lord, stay close to Him throughout the week, and especially honor the Sunday, His day. For He's given us 6 days to work. All He asks for is one. The Immaculate Heart of Mary.